Hi, I'm Chris, and welcome to episode 8 of the Crochet Cryss podcast. My sister Lisa and I own a yarn store in Mount Laurel, New Jersey called A Knit Sheep, and this is where I discuss my crochet things, including this thing right here, which is the finally finished, but for some strings to weave in, Offroad Sweater. So I thought this episode we would just do kind of a post-mortem of my process or lack thereof for making this sweater. So if you've seen previous episodes, you might know that I'm working on making things without patterns right now because I've been using patterns for a long time and made many garments from them, and I felt like I'd learned enough from working with patterns to try making something on my own. Plus, I felt like there was more that I could learn by making things without patterns, and I learned a few things making this sweater, so let's just jump right in. So let's take a look at how the sweater came out. So I did ribbing, post-stitch ribbing at the bottom, and then the whole body single crochet. I did stripes on the front. There are no stripes on the back, and I did a cowl neck largely for practical reasons, and I ended up doing 3/4 length sleeves. And let's talk about how all of this came about. So I didn't measure anything. The fact that I have a sweater that I can even get my body into is really down to pure dumb luck because I measured nothing. So working with patterns previously, I have made gauge swatches, but I'll be honest, I haven't really used gauge swatches for measurements. Usually I'm just seeing how the stitch pattern looks in the yarn that I'm using, because I'm almost never using the pattern yarn. I'm always using something from stash. It's very rare when I can actually match up the actual pattern yarn to the project I'm working on. So because I'm usually using a completely different yarn, I just want to see how a particular stitch pattern will look in the yarn that I'm using. Do I measure my gauge swatches? Sure. But if the gauge is off, I kind of just rock with it anyway. If it's really off, and I feel like I need to go up a hook size or down a hook size, I'll do that. But for the most part, I haven't really used my my gauge swatch as gospel. And I did the same thing with this. So did I make a gauge swatch? Yes. I wanted to see what this yarn would look like, all single crochet, and I think it looks stunning. I'm so happy with this fabric that I got. When people do stockinette stitch and knitting, that's kind of like the look that I think is defined for knitting for most people. When people think of what knitting looks like, they think of stockinette. I happen to think that the all single crochet looks just as stunning as stockinette does in knitting. I kind of fell in love with the single crochet stitch, and I plan to make a lot of use of it in garment making because, like I said, I think fundamentally it just gives you a gorgeous fabric. So let's talk about the yarn I use. This is from Machete Shop. It's hand dyed. This is their simple sock base, and the color is called Red Dragon, and the stripes are from June Price Fibers, and I'm not sure I still have these ball bands, so it's just yellow, green, and gray. I don't know what the actual colors are called, but the yarn, both yarns, the mini skeins I use for the stripes and the Machete Shop for the body, are both yarns that I picked up at the Allentown Fiber Festival back in April. And we bought yarn, my sister and I bought yarn at the Fiber Festival, kind of hoping to audition certain yarns and see what we might want to carry in the store. I vote way yes on Machete Shop. We already had the June Price Fibers mini skeins. We were able to pick those up at the show. But I'm really hoping before the end of the year we'll be able to get some of the Machete Shop in the store because I absolutely loved working with it. So when I started the sweater, I kind of just jumped right into it. I didn't really, like I said, I did that gauge swatch, and I even measured the gauge swatch, but did I use that to determine how many stitches my final garment should be? No. That would have been sensible. So instead, I stitched the first few rows of the ribbing, and I held it up against my body. And I was like, oh, that looks too small. Ripped it out, started over, adding a few more stitches, and held it up against my body again. I was like, oh yeah, that looks like it'll fit. That is not how you do this. That is not how you make a garment. That is insane. Like I said, I got lucky that it fit, but this is not the sweater I intended to make. This was not the vision of the sweater that I had in my mind. My sweater was actually supposed to be slightly looser fit, because I have about, I would say, an inch or so of ease, of positive ease on either side. So it was supposed to be a little bit looser, like maybe 2 inches of ease on either side, but shorter. So it's going to be oversized but cropped. Had I done that, probably wouldn't have run out of yarn. If you watched last week's episode, you know I ran out of yarn and didn't have enough to do my sleeves. Had the sweater gone to, you know, I won't say spec because I didn't have any specs, but had the sweater gone to plan, I probably wouldn't have run out of yarn, except things would have still gotten a little dicey around the neck because my neck opening was too big, and anyway, that ate up some yarn. But like I said, I got lucky. I'm happy with, I ended up doing 120 stitches. So my ribbing was 120 stitches of foundation single crochet, a row of double, and then 4 rows of front post, back post, treble crochet. And then the whole body is just single crochet. And as I was working on it, you know, I kind of blew through the front. I was really excited when I started this project. I blazed through the front of the sweater, slowed down a lot as I was working on the back of the sweater because it just got very monotonous just doing all single crochet in this one color yarn. But I got through it. But the whole time I was working on the back of the sweater, I could not ignore the fact that the front of the sweater, the neck looked really, really huge. I think I'd intended for it to be like 10 inches or something, but I didn't measure it. I don't know how much it actually came out to be, but it wasn't 10 inches. It was big enough for like 1 or 2 additional heads to fit through that opening. So like every time I touched it, every time I took it out the bag and saw it, I was like, gee, that neck opening looks really big. That neck looks big. That looks like a huge neck opening. Turns out it really was, because when I finished the back and finally stitched these shoulder seams, I could put it on and it was pretty much a smock. That neck opening was just tremendous. So I decided I would do a cowl neck, really so that some of the fabric of the cowl neck would drape down and cover up some of that neck opening. But even then, that really, I had to do a lot of rows of stitching in the round to take up some of the space because of my super huge, gigantic neck opening of evil, right? Because it just became like this monster that, I mean, literally as I was going to sleep at night, I would sometimes think about this neck opening and what I was going to do about it. So I talked about this last week's episode that, let's see, let me try holding the microphone. So, okay. You see all of this? That's just rows and rows and rows that I had to stitch to take up some of this neck opening. But I mentioned last week that even though that was unintentional, I actually really liked it. It was a very happy accident. Had it been intentional, I would have done it differently though, because I think I did a couple of rows of single crochet. When I realized how many rows I would have to do to start closing up this neckline, I switched to double crochet for a little while. And then my cowl is all half doubles because I wanted a taller stitch so that my cowl neck would go faster. Had I made this intentional, this would have all been half double crochet, just like the cowl neck, and this whole neck area would have very deliberately have been a different stitch from the body so that it would stand out more, but it would be a little more even. I don't know if you can see. I will put some pictures up on my Instagram, which is Crochet Cryss. But yeah, you can see those rows of double crochets. They just, for me, they stand out way too much. And this cowl neck ended up eating up almost a skein by itself. So I don't know if I had still decided to do the cowl neck, but the body of the sweater had been smaller like I'd intended, would I still have run out of yarn? I don't know. But I ended up switching to a 4mm hook for the cowl neck because I did want it to drape a little bit more. I refuse to use anything bigger than a 4mm for fingering weight yarn. I just think it's excessive. I know you want drape, but I just don't think you have to go to extremes to get drape in crochet. So I stopped at 4mm. Had I done, a bigger hook, I'd have a bigger drapier neckline, but it'd probably be a little too droopy rather than drapey. So I did a 4mm hook for the cowl neck. And I actually switched to my 3.5 because I did the body in 3.25mm. I switched to a 3.5 for the sleeves as well, just so they go a little bit faster. I ended up making the sleeves 3/4 length again, just because I was seriously running out of steam working on this sweater. And again, I just wanted them to go a little bit faster. So I did 3/4 length sleeves, and I did the same 4 rows of post-stitch ribbing on the sleeves that I did at the hem of the sweater, and I'm happy with how that came out. But my sleeves, I will say, I didn't taper them. I did the sleeves as one big rectangle, and sorry, seeing if someone's coming in the store. I did the sleeves as one big rectangle, and then I only did a little bit of shaping as I got down to the cuff. And so my sleeve width was 16 inches, and that is like my exact dimension as far as making my sleeve with no ease, negative or positive, which means my sleeve at the underarm just fits exactly. If I'd made it any smaller, I don't think I'd been able to get in the sweater and still have any kind of range of motion in my arm. So when I say I didn't take any measurements, I don't mean just my gauge swatch and my finished, didn't have any measurements in mind for my finished sweater. I didn't really take any measurements of myself either, which again is not how you do this. I just got really excited. I got really excited about the idea of trying something without a pattern, just because honestly, it just comes down to the fact that I'd never given myself permission to do that before. And I was just ready to take off. I was also really excited about this yarn. It was so beautiful. I love this color. If you saw my Allentown haul, you know that I very nearly missed out on this yarn because there were 4 skeins on the rack, and a woman had come into the booth and she picked up 2 of them, and I was there waiting to see if she was going to put them back, and thankfully she did, and I was able to get all 4 skeins because the plan was always to use it to make a sweater. So yeah, I took no measurements, and I had the vaguest idea of a plan. And I realize now that going forward, I definitely want to do some things differently. And the first thing is I'm going to take a full set of measurements of myself: waist, bust, across the shoulders, length of the arm, wrist, everything. I'm actually going to have my mom do that because she sews and she'll, do it all properly. But she's out of town right now, so when she gets back, that is the first order of business. She's going to watch this. So when you get back, Mom, that will be the first order of business. I'm going to need you to take some measurements for me. That said, I'm also going to have a plan in place for any future projects that will have all of the dimensions that I want for the finished item, so that I'm going to have my own schematic drawn up before I start working. I think I did do a rough schematic of the sweater somewhere, but I don't even know where the notebook is now that I wrote that down in. So that's how important I thought that schematic was. Like I said, I mostly got really lucky with the fact that this sweater fit, and I was so worried about it fitting that during the process, by the end I was calling it the demon sweater. I told my sister I had a haint in my project bag. I really was kind of feeling haunted by the sweater. I guess I was just really hyper aware of all of the mistakes that I was making along the way. And I was surely I couldn't make that many mistakes and still have a functional sweater. So the fact that I even have something to wear right now, I'm really excited about that. And I have to say that part of the motivation for me in making sure that I finished it, when I really did at one point want to quit, was I've been on here on YouTube for weeks telling people I was making a sweater, and I was like, well, what am I going to do if I don't ever have a sweater to show them? But I mean, I guess it was kind of like a positive pressure though, because like I said, I really might have actually quit if I didn't really want to show people a completed sweater. But honestly, I wanted to finish it as much for myself, because even though I made those mistakes, I needed to be okay with making mistakes. And for me, that meant finishing the sweater with all its flaws and just moving on to the next thing. So thankfully, I have in my library, for some reason I actually have 2 copies in my library. You know what? I think I bought one and I got one as a gift. Custom Crochet Sweaters by Dora Orenstein, which I think I mentioned before in an episode where I talked about like resources that I wanted to use for garment making, learning how to make garments. And this book, before any of the patterns, there's like almost 50 pages of just discussion about garments and garment construction in crochet. And I read it yesterday, and it's actually really useful. And she talks in depth about taking measurements. So let me see if I can find the page. There we go. So she shows you all of the measurements that you should take of yourself. And then she additionally recommends taking measurements of a sweater that you like the fit of, and using those 2 things to determine what you want your finished sweater to look like on you. And then she talks about how to make alterations from patterns, so that if you want something to be longer or tighter, if there's a bigger difference between, like, say you're busting your waist or you're busting your hip, then the pattern accounts for how to change the rate of increase or decrease so that you do get a custom fit for the sweater. This has a wealth of information that I had on my shelf and pretty much completely ignored. So the plan going forward is to make use of this and other things like this. My sister has been recommending this book called Knitting the Old Way, and the old way basically being without patterns. So it talks about the basic structure of various types of garments and how to assemble them. And my mom's actually been working with that book a bit, and she likes it. She's actually recommended it as well. So between those 2 things, I really want to make my next sweater less arduous, less stressful. And for me, that means being way more prepared before I start. Like I said, I'm going to have a full set of measurements for myself. I probably will take a couple of my sweaters that I have, some that, fit different ways, take full measurements of those sweaters and know exactly what I want the dimensions of my finished sweater to be before I start. And I will start my sweater with my own schematic. Now, the plan going forward is to never, ever, 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 ever try to make something for myself again with or without a pattern, without having a schematic with all of the measurements, so that if and when I'm going wrong as I'm working, I can see it immediately. I can take measurements of my my pieces as I'm working and know if something's not coming out according to the plan, because I'm going to have a plan. That'll be a new thing I'm trying. So I'm trying to figure out the best way to go forward using these resources that I have, because I'm thinking I could either just decide to plan another sweater, but use this as a reference that I will just refer to as needed. My other idea, if I really want a very thorough, comprehensive education in sweater making, would be to use this book kind of as my own personal sweater making workshop. And what I mean by that is that maybe what I might do, and I'm still deciding, is actually make all of the sweaters in this book. I know, right? Because patterns, and I've been looking at the patterns, and even though they're really nice designs, I'm like, do I really want to work this way again, where row 1 is do this and row 2 is do that, and repeat rows 3 to 6 18 times, or whatever it is, because I did absolutely love the freedom of just sitting and stitching and making something according to my own plan. But I'm thinking it might be worth the short-term pain for a long-term gain. One of the things I like about this book is how it is laid out. So each project, take a look at that, has a specific lesson associated with it. So when you make the floating tee, you're going to learn about altering body and sleeve lengths. When you make the fitted sleeve cardigan, you're going to be learning about adjusting size by changing gauge, and there's going to be a masterclass on armholes and sleeve caps. You're meant to learn something specific about garment construction, crochet garment construction, from each pattern. And I'm thinking that's maybe the way this book was intended to be used. Even though it's kind of a frustrating prospect for me, I think it might be beneficial. I personally have never been a big fan of like teaching myself things. I love learning new things, but I like having an instructor. I like having a person there that I can ask questions of. And personally, I like having a very formal structure for my education. And I feel like this is as close as I'm going to get to having someone else designing a lesson plan for me as far as how to design and custom fit sweaters for oneself. And maybe that's what I need right now. I mean, like I said, all's well that ends well, right? I think I have a sweater. I'm wearing a sweater. I like the sweater mostly. I have moments where I'm still not so crazy about it. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to wear this sweater. So win, right? That worked out. I ended up making a sweater that I can actually wear. But it was so stressful for me. And honestly, this took longer to make than anything else I've ever made, because I always have a pattern. I always have a set of step-by-step instructions telling me exactly what to do, when, where, and how. And I'm able to just kind of breeze through things. This, I was actually designing as I went along. You know, what length should I make my sleeves? Should they be tapered or should they be straight? What kind of neckline should I do? Oh, I ended up doing a cowl neck. That was completely unexpected. Should I put stripes on the back too, or just the front? All along the way, I'm making decisions about this garment. And when I think about it, 2 months for a sweater, especially at fingering weight, 3.25 millimeter hook, doesn't even seem like that long. That seems perfectly reasonable. But for me, it seemed to take forever. And I'm wondering if I went into it a little bit more confident, feeling like I had, you know, a lot of the skills covered in this book, would I be able to repeat this process, but 1, take less time, and 2, be way, way less stressed and, you know, a bit more confident about the process as I was working. So the plan right now is to make 1 sweater from this book. I'm gonna make the first one, which is I think it's some sort of t-shirt. Yeah, it's called the floating tee. Basically, it's something like this. It's just a rectangular body. It's a drop shoulder, but it's a lacy open stitch. And I'm gonna work that one pattern. Also, it'd probably be good practice for me too, because I don't really do very much in the way of lace work. So I think it would be cool to learn a lace stitch pattern. And I'm going to see how much this book helps me. There's a specific lesson on altering sleeve length and altering body length that is associated with that particular pattern. And I'm going to follow this, and I do have some plans to alter the pattern a little bit and see if what I gained from working from a pattern was worth, you know, my discomfort with working from patterns at the moment. And if I feel like the lesson was really beneficial to me, I will probably continue on with the book. And like I said, treat the book like a workshop, like the world's cheapest personalized crochet workshop, right? Because I'll be able to go through this at my own pace and, you know, pick which order I want to do the projects in and things like that. So that's where I am now. That's what I've gained from this experience of making my off-road sweater. I would do so much differently, you know, with the next sweater. However, I feel like I gained so much from this experience. I have very minimal regrets. I maybe regret not measuring some things, but other than that, I would say it was a mostly good experience just because I really like crocheting, and ultimately that's what I was doing. I was crocheting. So that's how it went. I actually finished the sweater that I have been talking about for weeks and weeks, and I know it's probably been a little bit boring because I'm a monogamous crocheter, so this was all I worked on. I might take a break to make a sample for the store. Other than that, I plan to jump right into my next thing as soon as I'm able to get measured by my mother. So I think that's it for this episode. I think that's plenty. I feel like I've been talking for ages. So thanks for tuning in. I hope it was interesting for you, and stay stitching.